Okay, so we will get started. I would like to welcome you. I'm Tanya Kabala with West Michigan Environmental Action Council, and want to thank you for coming on behalf of the WEMEAC, which is what we call West Michigan Environmental Action Council, the WEMEAC Muskegon Area Climate Action Committee. And there are a number of members on right now. Mary Valentine. Oh, let me see. Renee Hesselink. And I think there are a few more who may not be on, but we actually meet once a week and we plan projects related to climate action in Muskegon County. And we, we feel that climate change is the most pressing, the most urgent issue that is facing us above and beyond every other issue. And one of our main roles is to provide education on climate change, basic climate science, what people can do, and in particular, the role of local government or municipalities. And so we have put on this Climate Change 101 for candidates because we want to provide candidates and sitting board members and council members with the opportunity to learn more about climate science. It's not necessarily, a very easy topic, but also what can be done right here at our community level. And so we have basic climate science by Dr. Janet Vale, who has an excellent presentation for us. We have the role of local government by the White Lake Area Climate Action Council, Tamara Horn. They are working actively with local government in primarily the northern Muskegon County area. And then we also have the city of Montague, Jeff Falk, city manager. And the city of Montague has the great distinction of being the very first city along the lakeshore to declare a climate emergency, which they did in December 2020. And so Jeff can say very specifically what his city is doing and how they are leading by example. And I'm actually going to send this over to Sarah Trestador from the Sierra Club to provide you with some welcoming comments. After Sarah, we will have the three presentations. We kind of like to do that and hold questions till the end if possible. And then we will have a chance for folks to ask questions and then we'll talk about what we're doing beyond this. You know what, Sarah, I forgot. I was going to ask people to give just their name and where they're from before we get started. And what if I start? So say your jurisdiction. We'll just do that so we can kind of say hello to you. Bruce?
Bruce Freilich, City of Montague, running for a third term if people will have me.
George?
George Dufresne, White River Township. I am on a board member and also the zoning administrator.
Ken?
Hi, Ken Johnson, at-large commissioner for the city of Muskegon for the past 8 years and current candidate for this magnificent city.
For mayor.
For mayor of this magnificent city.
There you go.
Mary?
Mary Valentine, and I'm not running for anything, but I help a lot of candidates. So I want to stay informed.
And then Jeff, we're going to hear from, but you can, if you have a word, you can go ahead, of course.
Oh, Norton Shores, by the way, that's where I'm from.
Jeff Falk, City of Montague, City Manager.
Tamara?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tamara Horn, and I'm in the city of Whitehall. I'm not running for anything.
Janet?
Janet Vale from Grand Valley State University, Anna's Water Resources Institute.
Debbie?
Hi, I'm Debbie Hillebrand. I'm the mayor in the city of Whitehall currently and running for mayor, city of Whitehall.
Thank you. And then Patty?
I'm Patty. I live in Greenhaven. I'm not running for anything. I'm just interested in the topic because I like my municipality to do more than it's doing.
Rebecca?
I am Rebecca St. Clair. I am running for Commissioner at Large in the city of Muskegon.
Renee?
I think she's muted.
Yeah, I was. Renee Esselink, and I'm not running for anything, but I work with Tanya on the on this committee to plan these events.
Okay. Oh, Kwame?
Hi, I am Kwame James, and I am a member of the school board for Muskegon Public Schools.
Oh, excellent. Rachel?
Hi, Rachel Gorman. I'm seeking a position as Commissioner at Large in the City of Muskegon.
Okay, Lori?
Hi, I'm Lori Lundell. I am on the Fruitland Township Board as a trustee.
And Fawn?
Hi, I'm Fawn Cruz, and I am running for City Council in Roosevelt Park.
And then we end up with Sarah, and then Sarah's going to offer her welcoming comments.
Yeah, and I'll be super brief, but hi, everyone. My name's Sarah. I'm with the Sierra Club Michigan chapter. And I just want to echo what Tanya has already said. You know, we're really looking forward to being able to provide information to you all on, you know, kind of the basics of climate change and why local action on climate is so important, especially here on the west side of the state, where we are seeing, you know, the issue is starting to hit home with extreme weather and coastal erosion. You know, these are kind of nonpartisan issues that we can all agree we want to protect our Great Lakes and our lands and water. You know, similar to WEMIAC, the Sierra Club is nonpartisan, and we're all just fighting for protecting our state and planet. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I appreciate everyone who has, you know, taken the time to hop on another Zoom call.
Well, thank you very much. And as a former sitting council member and former candidate for state representative, I know how busy it is when you're campaigning. And so I really do want to thank you for showing up here tonight and appreciate it. And just also wanted to remind folks that this is being recorded. So you will be able to we'll probably send it out early next week. You'll be able to take a look at it later if you would like. And so we're going to start with Janet. And she is going to start her presentation. Not only is Janet a fantastic longstanding research scientist for our area, she also attended Al Gore's training, and so has some really excellent slides to share as part of that.
Okay, so I'm very grateful to be asked to be here this evening because climate change is something I love to talk about and have been following for quite some time. The title of my presentation is Simple, Serious, and Solvable. Interesting. Well, let's find out what about climate change is simple, what's serious, and what is solvable. First of all, if you need a quick overview of climate change, there's some excellent websites out there. This is an example of NASA's global climate change website. So we're not going to cover in copious detail what climate change is all about or science in any copious detail, but I would refer you to that sort of site. Another site is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. This group actually is associated with the United Nations, and it has been around for many, many years, since the last 80s, 88 or so. And it is a group of independent scientists mainly who meet and talk about what's going on with climate change, and they generate some fabulous reports. So one of the reports to look for is this synthesis report coming out in 2022, but there are other reports in this group of reports that I think if you really want to know what's up with climate change, that's a really, really super reference place. Okay. So our next thing that I think we need to make sure everybody is on the same page with is what is the difference between weather and climate? When you're speaking about climate change, sometimes folks just really get all confused and messed up on that one. So in terms of weather and climate change, weather, we like to say, is what you get. So if you go outside, whatever's happening, that's your weather. And of course, as Michiganders, we know weather is extremely changeable. Climate, however, is this long-term behavior. And long-term behavior means your average weather pattern over decades. Usually it's 30 years. So that's really an important difference to appreciate. Well, given that then, what about climate then? Well, the climate of the Earth is very unique in that we have what is known as the greenhouse effect. And this animation kind of shows you what's up. So we do have energy from the sun. A lot of that is ultraviolet radiation, which then bounces down to the Earth. Some of it's reflected back into space, but then some is absorbed by the Earth, the clouds. That absorbed energy is in the form of heat. Now, heat certainly directly relates to temperature. So the Earth has what's known as a natural greenhouse effect. And that natural greenhouse effect, you can see the solar radiation coming in, and you can see the re-radiated types of things that are happening. But then you also see a layer, well, actually it's not exactly a layer, it's mixed in greenhouse gases. Now, if we have our greenhouse gas amounts increase, then what'll happen is that we're going to have more of our heat trapped within the Earth's atmosphere. If more heat is trapped in the Earth's atmosphere, temperature increase. Here are some of our greenhouse gases. Nitrous oxide, methane, carbon dioxide are probably ones that you associate with climate change, but water vapor also is a greenhouse gas. If you were going to regulate water vapor, good luck. I mean, like, why would you want to? I mean, it's the water cycle and all that. However, these other gases are in trace amounts, but they can cause some real issues, as we're going to see. So we have carbon dioxide, and probably some of you, or most of you, are probably familiar with the carbon cycle. We have certain sources of carbon dioxide, which include emissions, forest fires, decomposition, respiration, but we have a lot of places where the carbon can sink into ocean, plants, and soil. Now, the ocean, plants, and soil can only kind of take up so much carbon, and if you have a lot of carbon being produced, then you have a little bit of an issue going on here. And we have the Keeling curve, which was kind of a PhD dissertation of somebody at Scripps Institute in California, San Diego, California. And Keeling worked at Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, and he was tracking the monthly and daily, really, carbon dioxide concentration. He started his work in the late 50s, and as you can see, from like the late 50s to present, there's been a significant increase in parts per million of carbon dioxide concentrations. There are a number of observatories that also track this sort of information, so this just isn't the only one. Now, if we look at our historic carbon dioxide levels, what we find is for many, many years, the atmospheric carbon dioxide was running maybe 280 parts per million. But now we have this massive increase in carbon dioxide since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions presently, and this is from 2018, we find that most of the emissions that are tracked are carbon dioxide, but some of the other greenhouse gases are emitting quite a bit as well. If you look at total carbon dioxide emissions by world regions, you can see that it's not just the United States that's contributing to carbon dioxide emissions, but countries throughout the whole world. China, for example. Now, we just saw two curves. We saw increase in carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere. We saw an increase in carbon dioxide emissions. So this is the third graph to look at. And these three kind of go together. And this is what's happening with temperature. It's starting in 1880, again, Industrial Revolution. And you can see increase that's rapidly happening at this time. Now, what's interesting is you can go back quite a bit of time with proxy data from, ice cores, tree rings, and all that. And we find that the temperature increase that we're observing now is certainly unprecedented. You'll have people that argue that maybe this is just kind of happening all by itself through natural activity. But when you tie in the humans and the effects of us having all those emissions, then you see a different pattern. Well, what should we do about all this? I'm sure most of you have heard of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this is something that was originally adopted in 2015. And it's a legally binding international treaty. So 196 parties, as they call them, have agreed that the goal of limiting global warming is a very worthy goal. They would like to try to keep the temperature below 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to these pre-industrial levels. In order to do this, the countries are pledging to do things to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. The United States was out of the climate agreement for a while, but we are back in it again. Okay. So next thing, in order to keep then the temperature from rising no more than to 1.5 degrees, you'd have to reduce your emissions by 45% before 2030. Or you'd have to, you'd have to have your renewable energy increasing to 70 to 80% of our power by 2050. So those are pretty ambitious goals. Now, about every few years, there's a conference of the people who have worked on the climate agreement. There's a huge conference coming up in Glasgow, Scotland, and it's going to be through October 31st through 12th of November. This conference actually was supposed to happened last year. It didn't because of COVID, so they rescheduled it again for this year. So it's worth kind of following to see how well countries are doing with their pledges to decrease their carbon dioxide. Just a few effects then of climate change, specifically for the Midwest. We're talking about hotter summers, downpours, flooding, all sorts of ranges of risks that are being exacerbated by all this. And there's a group called GLISA, they work out of University of Michigan and MSU, that develop all sorts of graphics that are really kind of interesting to peruse. But this is their 2020 summary, talking about it was a little bit higher air temperature, water levels than usual, ice cover was less, the overall precipitation was kind of variable. That's a very, very good information source for climate summaries of Michigan. Okay, so next one is what the future may bring. And there's the present location of Michigan. And it's thought that if this climate change continues at the rate it is, by the end of this century, Michigan summers will feel like the more current, like the summers in Arkansas. So that would be really a big change in many different ways. So what are some of the solutions? Well, there's kind of a two-pronged approach. First of all, there's something called mitigation, where you're trying to reduce those greenhouse gases. And there's something called adaptation, which is preparing for those changes. Another term that's important to know about is resilience. So if you have like these hazardous events and trends and disturbances and such, how well is your community able to cope with all these things that might happen with climate change? So there's a really good toolkit, US Climate Resilience Toolkit, that can walk you through exploring your hazards, your vulnerability and risk, investigating options, prioritizing plans, taking action. So good information that I think would be helpful for your planning. All right. So the state of Michigan also has some things that they were talking about in a really strong video on climate, or webinar on climate change. And this was one of their resources. It's called Resilient Michigan. And so if you want to know a little more about resiliency, that one is a good thing to watch. Then there's another one. This is by planning agency called Survive and Thrive, Lessons Learned from Michigan Coastal Communities, Planning for Resiliency. And a third resource is Michigan Hazard Analysis, that goes through some of the things that could happen and how you should analyze potential effects. So I'm going to wrap it up with something I think will be very interesting for you to take a look at. It's the Yale Climate Communication Surveys. It shows you a little bit about what the general public is thinking about climate change. And there's something called Six Americas survey. 26 are alarmed, 29% concerned, 19% cautious, and then you have your disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive groups of folks. So this Yale University climate communication site also has all sorts of graphics, and it shows you a little bit about various questions. Global warming is happening, and a large proportion of the country believes that it is happening. You can zero in on a congressional district and kind of query the same thing. And if you see the graph below, it says 66% of folks think that it's happening. You could also drill down to some beliefs that people in this district have. So there are some strong beliefs that it's happening because of human activities, but there's a lot of deniers, that 36%. Some doubt about whether most scientists think global warming is happening. It's interesting. It's affecting weather. And then down risk, I think, is really extremely interesting because the survey shows global warming will harm me personally, and only 35% think so, and 54% think it's not. Interesting, right? But there's a risk of it happening. If you're working through policies, then this is kind of good news. Most folks think the local officials ought to be doing more, and citizens should be doing more. Funding research into renewable energy sources, that was huge. That's kind of interesting. You should regulate CO2 as a strong support for that. Tax rebates for energy efficient vehicles or solar panels. And this is a good one, right? Schools should be about global warming. So I would urge you to look at this Yale climate communication information, because I think you would find it valuable as you were running for your offices.
Janet, and we're going to kind of keep things moving and then take questions after all the presentations. And so hang on to your questions if you can. And Tamara's already getting started. Also, please mute if you're not presenting right now or talking.
All right. Thanks for that. Those are some interesting slides that I haven't seen before. So so as I said earlier, I'm Tamara and I live in Whitehall. I'm a member of the White Lake Area Climate Action Council, and our group formed in June 2020, and it's a growing group of local citizens who were inspired to act on the climate emergency after we read the book, The Future We Choose: Surviving the Climate Crisis. And it included some of the information that Janet just shared with us, but also it had 10 actions that people can start on their own. And when we read that book, one of the actions was getting more involved locally in our community. And so that is how our group formed. And so the members of our group recognize that the climate crisis is here, and we want to partner with our municipalities and local elected officials to restore a healthy and safe climate. So I think a lot of what we see in the news, if we read it about the climate emergency, is that there's focus on worldwide impacts, and our group encourages people to consider local impacts in our communities, on our neighbors and business owners, and what farmers in our area might be experiencing. So this slide just has some examples that may affect your community. And just to warn you, I'm going to be doing are you still with us here thing. So I'm going to ask you a question. And if you can find the chat box by looking at the lower part of your screen, it says chat. And then if you click on that, it should open a box where you can type in to all of us and answer. So looking at this screen, not all of these things will necessarily affect your city or town. And I think it's important when you're running as a candidate that you know the demographics of your area that you're running in. So if you know, and if you would like to write and share in the chat box, what do you think is the biggest economic driver in your city or town? Is it agricultural, manufacturing, tourism? Maybe it's a mix of all of these. What do you think is going to be the biggest impact of climate change in your area? I don't know how to pull up chat once I have share on, but oh, I think I see it there now. Now that, yeah, I see your bubble, I can look.
Like a bunch of, looks like tourism in Fruitland, tourism, agriculture, tourism, manufacturing and waste, tourism. Tourism is winning so far.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, that the picture here is that's locally, I think it was actually, it's at one of the Montague beaches a couple summers ago. And so it impacts people being able to swim in the lake because the heat promotes the growth of bacteria, which closes some of our beaches. And I know that here in Whitehall and Montague area, that there's a lot of fishing that happens. So as the streams and rivers heat up, that affects the little baby fish being able to have their nurseries. And so a lot of fishermen and fisherwomen are going to be seeing reduced fishing that they can have and less ice that they can sit on to fish. So I would just encourage you moving forward to try to think hyper local about the impacts of climate change, and then think like an elected official, if you aren't already, about how we can lessen the impacts through our policies and city planning. So what can municipalities do to restore a safe climate? You can, as a city or a town, declare a climate emergency. And then once a climate emergency is declared, that prompts your citywide sustainability plan. And usually the city manager or the supervisor is going to take the lead on forming that plan. And there are many decisions to be made at the local level that can be climate focused. And just to name a few of those, buildings, cities can, and municipalities, I guess I should say, can consider improving your energy efficiency of new buildings and also retrofitting old ones. Land use is a big deal. Are you allowing for solar and wind permitting for homeowners or farms if you're in an agricultural area? And municipalities can also plan for green infrastructure. So that's your parks and along your roads, and find ways to handle the extra stormwater when we have those bigger storms that come through. And then also think about your city vehicles and how we can start transitioning to electric vehicles and industrial power tools like electric mowers. And not that you can do all of those at once, but as we're transitioning those out, you can choose and try them and see how they work. So planning for potential impacts is attractive to businesses and people who are considering moving to your area, but it also gives stability to your existing citizens and businesses. So what is a climate emergency declaration? This shows a snapshot of the resolution that Montague's council passed. And this is the first portion, which includes facts about climate change and a lot of what we've talked about up to this point about. And the second portion that you can't see are some of the goals and the timeline for action for the city. So to avoid the worst global impacts, everyone should be planning for zero carbon before 2040. So to start the process of declaring a climate emergency in Montague, there were a couple of council work sessions, and there was discussion among the council, and then there were public comments from members of our group. And then we provided a template from a group that's called the Climate Mobilization, and the city of Montague used that template, and then they tailored it to fit their city. So for example, the council subcommittee met separately during 1 month, and they rewrote this resolution that you see here to be simpler so that the students can read and understand it. And the council then voted in December, and they declared a climate emergency. And I also want to mention that the city of Whitehall has followed a similar path, and they declared a climate emergency last month. So what can you do as an elected official? I think these are two of the biggest things. You can learn more about it. There is so much, it is a complicated issue. So there's always something that you can be learning a little bit more about it. And you should talk about it with your friends and community members. Share what you're learning about on the first bullet. Like if you read something new or you hear something new, bring up to your friends or the voters in your community as you're campaigning and ask them their thoughts about it. And then make sure you listen to what they have to say so you know what their concerns are for the area that you're campaigning in. And at the bottom here, I have my contact info if you have questions after this meeting. And then my last thing, I'm looking at the time here to see how long I took. Okay, I'm good to tell you a little bit about these resources. I just brought to show you a quick list, a book, a movie, and a website about climate change. So depending on how you like to learn, you can choose one of these. The movie would be a top recommendation if you haven't seen it. It's David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet, and it is his personal witness statement. He starts from, now he is 95 years old. So the entire movie goes through from what he has witnessed on our planet from when he was born all the way to today, and how much it has changed. And it's really interesting through the movie how they show at different points in his life that what was happening to the population and how much wilderness was left on our planet at different points. The book that I mentioned at the beginning is The Future We Choose, which I would recommend. It's not as heavy as some other books, and it offers some really doable solutions, and they're like planting trees. You can simply focus on planting trees and you'll be doing a good thing. And then the website I've recommended is the Climate Mobilization. They have the template if you think your city or town or village might be interested in declaring a climate emergency. You can kind of poke around on there and get an idea of what that entails. And now I will stop sharing and I will hand it over to Jeff.
One thing I'm going to mention before Jeff starts talking is that when Tamara mentioned one of the first things to do is to learn about it and talk about it, that Yale community, the Yale reference that Janet made also pointed out that a very small percentage of people ever heard anybody talking about climate change on a regular basis. And so that's something you can do to get it out into the regular conversation. And it's something that Tamara's group has had a huge impact on, that people in, the White Lake area and the city of Montague as well have started the conversation about it. So where's Jeff? Oh, there he is.
All right, are we ready?
Yes.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit kind of from the city perspective and what happened through the process, city of Montague here. And I think one of the big things to note is that not only when we were working on this did we talk about climate change and the climate emergency, but talked about kind of the bigger idea of sustainability. And I think that is a really nice tie for talking to community members, because you're not only talking about creating a sustainable community, but you're talking about creating a healthy community. So we focused on some of those within the resolution itself. This, I think, is a pretty good graph on talking and capturing that idea of climate change affecting health. So on this slide, it has rising temperatures, extreme weather, air quality impacts, vector-borne diseases. And I even, in one of my examples, talked about Lyme disease in Michigan, especially in Western Michigan, for those vectors of diseases. So you can see from 1998 to 2016, how ticks and Lyme disease has spread throughout Michigan because of these changes in temperature. Basically, this was based on a whole report talking about winter temperatures throughout the last several decades and how that's allowed not only ticks, but Lyme disease to spread throughout Michigan and also Wisconsin, Minnesota area. So linking in some of those kind of health criteria and climate change for those direct impacts to people. So again, sustainability, and this is, I kind of pulled this in a little bit more when we were talking with the general public about climate change, because the idea of sustainability, especially for the White Lake area, had been talked about quite a bit. So looking at not only the environment, but also the social and the economic impacts, and really trying to find that sweet spot in the middle. So it's not just one or the other, it's to try to find the balance between all three of those different components. The other thing to note is with climate change is not only those improvements to community health and quality of life, and Janet mentioned some of these things as well, about talking about building more resilient communities, so enhancing ecosystem services, stronger economic downtowns, greater energy independence. So pulling in this idea of integrating some of these actions are going to not only benefit community health and quality of life, but also make the community and even downtowns more resilient. And then obviously the last one reduces community risk, the risk management component, because of our close tie to agricultural lands just to the north of us and in the area. We've talked a lot about local food networks, food security. Transportation is a big one, and infrastructure protection. And I'll talk a little bit as we are kind of, I always like to say we're trying to build the bike while we're also trying to ride it and implementing these actions. So I'll talk a little bit about some of these things moving forward. So this is the same slide that Tamara had there, kind of the intro to the climate emergency resolution. Again, the city passed this in December of 2020. And since then, we had some actions that we've been working on. And even though we had some deadlines in here, we're working on them, but it has taken a little bit longer than first expected, just because of everything that's been happening. Obviously the pandemic, but also lots of other things within the city. As part of that resolution, we dedicated to eliminating the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And when we put that in there, it was to really focus on the city operations itself, to lead by example, to kind of show what we as a municipality could do. And again, that goal of trying to reach half our emissions by 2030. As we're kind of working on this, I think we will be far beyond the half by 2030. And we can move on to the next part, which is then city providing opportunities and incentives for the community as a whole. So the idea is to not only us to lead by example, but then help our community to get to that 2040 goal as well. One of the things that's kind of helping us to do this is we stated as part of our emergency resolution is to establish this climate map, this mobilization action plan. And it's basically a big fancy spreadsheet that we talk about different subject areas, different topic areas, including both city initiatives, so things that we are going to directly do, as well as community initiatives. So it might be things that we implement on behalf of the community, but it could be things that we're also looking for other partners to work on those activities. So this one was related to transportation. This is an example. So looking at our gas and diesel operated vehicles, how we shift because of technology, how we could shift to hybrid vehicles and then eventually moving to electric vehicles, looking at pedestrian travel, alternative travel for the community. And then once we get down in community initiatives, something simply as putting in public EV charging stations. So trying to think not only things that we can do in our operations, but looking at the broader community itself. This obviously filters down beyond just what's happening within City Hall. So trying to get this out to all of our boards and commissions as we are meeting a little bit more regularly coming out of the pandemic. So looking at the Planning Commission, Downtown Development Authority, looking at our code of ordinances, our master plans, and seeing how we can implement these opportunities throughout the entire city operations. I think the big question people are always going to be asking is that funding. How do we make it happen? So seeking opportunities and funding to implement the resolution itself. And as municipalities get into this, I've learned a lot in the last 12 months, and I think there's lots of opportunities that are out there and different ways to implement these different projects and programs. As we're rolling this out, I wanted the community to recognize what some of these changes might be. So something as simply looking at our fleet conversion, our within our city operations, everything from police vehicles to Department of Public Works. So the city of Montague has already purchased our first hybrid police patrol vehicle. It has been delayed because of the microchip, which is affecting everything. That is in the works and have ordered our second because there are not any EV certified police patrol vehicles. So we are implementing it in steps. And then as our other equipment and vehicles kind of come out of rotation, then we will also look at transferring those over either to hybrid or EV as we can. Also kind of taking a broader perspective of looking at the community, those alternative transportation, whether that's increasing pedestrian traffic, simply implementing more sidewalks, seeing how we can do different bike trails, bike lanes within the community, EV stations, and even looking to look at public transportation within the White Lake community. The transportation infrastructure itself, and this comes back into previous comments by both presenters about that green infrastructure. So how can we do other activities that benefit not only climate change, but community health? So looking at stormwater basins, street calming. So down in the left-hand corner there is looking at a traditional street, wide street, how to put in different curbs and bump outs to calm traffic to get pedestrian flow within those areas, implementing native gardens, stormwater retention areas, and even simply tree planting within the community. Energy efficiency can be anything from our street lighting itself. The city over the last several years, for all the street lights that we own within the downtown, have been converted to LED. We are now working closely with Consumers Energy to transfer the remaining street lights all to LED, and then seeing if there's even opportunities to either link a bank of street lights or individual lights to solar. There's direct energy. This also includes looking at our parks department. So everything from going to an electric mower. We purchased our first electric mower, which is used in the city's campground. It's kind of a test run to see how it works and the ability to use it in other parts of the city. And then other small operational equipment within the parks department as well. We're also looking at kind of bigger energy efficiency projects. So looking at things like not only increasing the efficiency of the building envelope of City Hall or other structures that the city owns, but also looking at that energy conversion and implementing solar panels on our buildings within our infrastructure, and seeing how we use that to not only benefit our direct operations, but to maybe look at helping to produce energy for those street lights or banks of street lights and linking these different grids together. The community energy efficiency program, so that would be kind of looking at the next step, is looking for those partners, not only Consumers Energy and DTE, but also local community partners of how can we implement energy efficient for our residents, for our businesses, for our industrial partners, and seeing how, whether that's through an energy efficiency analysis or finding the right programs to link them into, so that it's not just our operations, but the entire community. And we've been exploring not only how to do this possibly through a block grant program, but also looking at energy efficiency savings from our buildings to roll those into cost savings for the general public. And then the last component, municipal and community waste management. So whether that's traditional waste management with recycling, but also looking at compost and other ways to take care of that waste cycle within the community. So trying to tie all those together. In doing all this, we are again trying to ride the bike while we're also trying to build it, is trying to figure out how can we measure, how do we know that we're making change. And so even at the very beginning, doing some rough estimates of how many tons of carbon we're producing a year with our operations. So these are just city operations, not the entire community. Able to come up with some rough numbers. And you can see by looking at the pie chart there, 41% is through electrical usage. So the more we can convert that to alternative energy sources. And then the other two big ones for us are fuel, gasoline, and fuel diesel. So that's operation of all of our equipment, but also heating of our buildings. So looking at all those different components, as we slowly start to convert, again, the goal is to half that by 2030 and then reach net zero by 2040. Again, I think we can do that fairly easily for the city operations. It's going to be a little bit more difficult as we roll it out to the community, but that's the hope. If we can lead by example, then we can get our community on board as well. One of the things to roll out these efforts to the community is we created an organization, an informal organization called Montague Together, with the intent of showing that this initiative, the climate emergency, is not a city initiative. It's not the White Lake Area Climate Action Council's initiative, it's the community initiative. So coming together to find those solutions. So earlier this year in May, we put together an electronics recycling event, free to the residents of Montague, as well as making it available to the broader public in the White Lake area. And then we partnered with WEMIAC to put together a Rain Barrel Workshop, which is coming up September 25th, so this weekend. So trying to use some of these small, unique events to get people tied into the activities that are happening within the city, and then making that connection to involve them in the changes that we want to see over the next couple of years. There's my contact info. I am happy to answer anybody's questions, not only tonight, but if you're going through different activities or have ideas, have questions, reach out to me, either by email or give me a call. I'd be happy to. As kind of the first to adopt a climate emergency in the area, we are helping to partner with other municipalities. So work on and off with the city of Whitehall as they were working on their resolution, working with a couple municipalities to the north as they considering the resolution. I think one of them actually just adopted. So we'll be meeting their village manager in the next couple of weeks to help them to look at the climate map, to kind of show what's going on even in the first 12 months here of what we've been able to achieve in the city of Montague.
Well, thank you very much. I just have to admit how pleased I am to see our area kind of lead the way on climate change. We're in a climate emergency. We're in a crisis. There's no doubt about that. at the very least, though, I think it's important to lead the way and to look at all of the opportunities, because we have to transform and transition. And it's just very exciting to see that we have folks who are willing to step up, like the White Lake Area Climate Action Council, like Jeff leading the way with the city of Montague, and with Janet with her very important educational work. One thing I wanted to mention, and I want to mention it because I didn't fully understand it myself, is that when we talk about electrifying vehicles, you know what I mean, electrifying the fleet, you know, someone might think, well, okay, so that's not such a big deal. You know, when you turn on your electricity, you're tied to coal or natural gas, right? But the idea behind this is to electrify everything and clean up the grid so that the grid is fueled by wind and solar and renewable clean energy sources, so that when we have a clean grid and then we plug in, then we have that clean energy. So the idea is to electrify everything and plug it into a clean grid. So now, usually we take questions by chat. We could do that by chat, so folks can provide questions by chat, or certainly you may unmute yourself if it doesn't get too complicated. We can just take questions just in person. Certainly, any feedback you have on whether or not this has been helpful to you as a candidate. And then we certainly wanted to make sure that there are folks here like Jeff, like Janet, like Tamara, and Sarah from the Sierra Club, who would be willing to help you further understand this and help you fashion a position or a platform if that's of interest to you. So I think we have a few in the chat. Let me see. I have a little bit of a interesting system, so I can't. Okay. I actually can't read mine. Is there a question in the chat that I'm not able to see right now? Ken, did you mention something about medical care?
Yeah, I was responding to his, how I hadn't thought of putting that one on the list, but yeah, definitely in Muskegon.
Yeah, we're among our industries that bolster our economy or support our economy. Yeah, the city of Muskegon is fortunate to have a fairly well diversified economy and further diversifying economy. So that's great. Now we even have cannabis industry happening in Muskegon, which does have a tie-in with medical care to some extent. You know, public health, medicinal. But I do have a question, if I may, Tanya.
Sure.
It's for the Montague City Manager. You mentioned your LED lights and potentially connecting to the solar power. So we did our LED upgrade. We're in our final phase of it for the city of Muskegon. And when we sat down this road a few years ago, I wanted to have solar panel lights as well. That wasn't an option with Consumers Energy. So you're not having solar powered lights, but you're going to have solar banks that power the lights. That's what you're looking into. Are those lights owned by Montague? Or are they owned by consumers? If they are owned by consumers, they seem to be amenable to connecting to solar powered panels. And then would the city of Montague own those panels, or consumers own them? Or could you give me a little bit more details as to what you're exploring in that regard?
Yep. So all of our panels in downtown, or all of our streetlights in downtown, are owned by the city. So as we've done improvements in the downtown, we've changed over all the streetlights and changed over the street poles. So we own those. So that's an easy one. As we move out into the city itself, the city has multiple properties spread throughout. And as we do solar bank conversions for our operations, we will also then take over street lighting, kind of creating these solar powered loop. So as an example, we have a Department of Public Works in an area that's not by City Hall. It would not only power that building, but also power a 3-block radius and encompass the street lighting in that area. So we would essentially be taking consumers' power out of the picture, and we would take over the street lighting with the intent of our solar then powers that system or that section of system.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bruce, but we have one more before you, Bruce. Mary wants to know how you got the climate emergency passed. So I don't know if that's Tamara or Jeff or both. Tamara, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, I guess as far as like how, because it doesn't just magically happen, basically there's work that goes into that. And so part of what our group did is we were organizing together to show up so that it's not just a single person showing up at a council meeting, but a group of people that are expressing. So that's part of the reason we meet regularly, is to talk about and learn about, like, a lot of people don't know when their city council meet. What is your city council, or what is your board of trustees? A lot of people don't know that. So just simply organizing people to find out where to show up and the time, and then how to speak about it. Oh yeah, and how long did it take? It actually, for Montague, probably it was quicker than most on average. I think the process was 6 months from start to finish. So from showing up to meeting and proposing the idea, and then about a month that the subcommittee worked on the council, the subcommittee worked on reworking the draft of it. And then maybe another work session and another council meeting to pass and to vote on it. But along that way, our group was collecting signatures on a petition and continuing to show up at every meeting, just so that we're aware of what was going on and can continue to ask about it, so that we can see movement a little faster.
Let me add to that. I'm just going to jump in, Tanya. You form subcommittees in our city voluntarily. So are you in favor of what Tamara and her group are doing? You jump in, you say, yeah, I'll be on that subcommittee. So I did, and others who were willing. That meant we could take their Al Gore level 30,000 foot language and throw it away. Sorry, but we did. And bring it down to language that people in Montague could connect to better. Al Gore has great truths, and 30,000 feet has great truths. But for the average person on the street in Montague, they don't connect. And so we needed to connect it on the ground to our realities. One other piece, and this is jumping away from that resolution question, maintenance, property maintenance codes, requirements that you, for example, keep your lawn a certain height or cut it back to that height every so often. Those kind of property maintenance requirements can be changed to increase the amount of native plants with deeper root systems that put carbon back into the soil. And you can take pressure off homeowners. Tamara has this at her home. She has a native garden and actually got a visit from the local enforcement people saying, hey, you're not cutting your lawn. And she was able to say, well, no, this is how it's supposed to be. But that kind of freedom to give a property owner choice, positive choices, and take the pressure off using a mower and running 2-cycle engines and polluting is a real choice toward a real opportunity for private choice to exercise better stewardship in the environment, one by one household to the next.
Well, I think one other really important factor for the city of Whitehall is Jeff Alk. Maybe not everybody knows that Jeff Alk was the longtime executive director of the Muskegon Conservation District. So it helps to have somebody in that primary role with such an in-depth knowledge of natural resources. And so I think that's important to note for folks, that having staff that are knowledgeable and motivated makes a tremendous difference. Jeff, what did you want to add to that?
I think Tamara gave a good overview. I think the biggest thing at the council level was there was discussions back and forth on the resolution. And when it went to the subcommittee, so there were a lot of changes with the actual language and even presenting it to the council to look at again before a final adoption. So there were ongoing tweaks and alterations that happened. I think that's important because then there's engagement by the entire council. So
I think it's important to note too that Tamara started with the template from the National Climate Mobilization, not necessarily Al Gore, but it's this National Climate Mobilization. And they had a 4-page resolution. And I understand where they're coming from. They said to the extent possible, try to keep it consistent with that. On the other hand, being a city council member, the longer resolution you have, the less likely it is that it's going to pass because it's going to have something objectionable in it. So I think a good start for anybody who's interested in this for their jurisdiction is to look at, look at what the city of Montague ended up with. And I think the city of Whitehall is pretty close, isn't it, Tamara? Or maybe Debbie would know that.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Debbie, and I would
Yeah,
agree.
City of Whitehall has also recently passed the resolution. So it was a bit of a mixed bag, and I think Tamara can attest to that. We had there's a whole thing around the percentage of people who believe that climate change is happening versus those who don't. And we have some of those folks on our council. So it's a little bit tricky to try to get things going. But I think we were pretty successful in getting good input from Tamara, and having the information and Jeff as a resource. And I really like the analogy of building a bike and riding it too, because we had a little bit of pushback. We're like, well, wait a minute, we don't know what we're doing. Nobody knows what we're doing. We don't want to go do this. And, to kind of just join hands and say, you know what, we're going to have to just figure this out because we need to lead this way. So I'm super happy that the city of Whitehall has gotten on board, and it's going to be clunky and those wheels are going to go flat and we're going to probably fall off our bikes, but we're going to do our best to build them and ride them at the same time. So I love the fact that we have a lot of good resources. Jeff, you're certainly one of them. So thank you, Tamara, the team that you're working with. Yeah, it's a good thing, and it's a necessary thing. And we just need to join hands and go forward and figure it out as we go if we have to.
Other questions from folks? Was this information useful to you? I think that would be helpful for us. I know climate science is not an easy topic.
Can you hear me? I'm not muted, am I? This is Mary.
No,
okay, yeah, I thought that was very helpful. I thought the information you gave was very helpful. And I just want to make another comment along the way that this points to the importance of electing the correct people and getting involved in elections. You need people on those committees who understand what's happening with the climate.
Well, I think everybody I always tell people, you can be the relative expert in your community. I mean, we, and in your circles, you can start teaching and talking about. Bruce, I'm going to hang on to you 1 minute just to see if there's someone who hasn't asked a question.
I do actually have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to ask a question about the pH levels. This might be a question best directed or answered by Janet, but potentially by others. I don't know if you guys have come across this or thought about this at all. But as the climate does continue to the temperature continues to rise, well, that was, of course, increasing the temperatures in our waters. Well, pH levels also affect that and will eventually continue to increase it at greater levels. which there are, contributors to that, which of course, one of the number one factors is, salting our roads in the wintertime, that getting into the groundwater, which eventually ends up in our lakes. And I'm just wondering if anybody has come across any alternatives to that, or if we have thought about any other solutions to that, because I know that that's going to be, on top of all these other great things that we're trying to do. That is something huge that we want to do and, maintain our lakes for the future and not, keep that bacteria back and stuff like that.
Are you looking at alternatives to road salt, Fawn?
Yeah, or some, because they're, when we do have icy roads, which of course we need to clear the roads and things like that, but, we do use exorbitant amounts of salt, and that gets into the groundwater and eventually changes the pH levels of the water.
I know that some
Sand.
folks use beet juice. Jeff or Janet, what do you say?
It seems like a lot of places use sand, don't they?
Yeah, this is kind of interesting because I had an intern from our environmental studies and sustainability department work with me during the summer, and she also worked with Jeff. And she was up there monitoring salt levels in White Lake at a few spots, and Jeff helped her find some sites, and she had a pretty comprehensive term paper that she ended up doing. But I'm going to bounce that one over to Jeff because I know he's on top of salt.
All right, thanks, Janet. Yeah, so we work with a student there, and so trying to look at what is the long-term effect, realizing that not only can we have an instantaneous change in those pH levels, but looking at what might be the change in sediments over time. So you have the change in microorganisms and the health of the system. I think from my perspective, from what we've seen is it's probably too early, but I know there's been mention about beet juice and sand and things like that, other alternatives. So it's definitely, I know it's something that's been ongoing for a long time. I don't know that there's a solution or an answer to your question right now, Fawn, sorry.
I hate to say it, but as we have less winter, it may be less of a problem. Kwame, do you have a question?
I'm sorry, I had some trouble finding my mute button. But I do have a question. I wonder if you all are thinking very much about cultural influences on the progress of climate change. I'm thinking specifically about stuff that I've read from Charles Eisenstein, who Tanya introduced me to a couple years ago. He has a lot to say about how just the very fact that our cultural systems, our economic systems, our social systems have baked into them this idea of just continued growth as fast as we can, and getting the most out of things, and maximizing our yield, and all this whole idea that bigger is better is sort of deeply internalized in our human culture right now. And I wonder how much all the little how much these things that we've talked about so far are symptomatic of something deeper. Yeah, please do comment on that one.
Yeah, and I have a comment on that too, just based on our last book chat. Go ahead, Tamara.
Yeah, I was going to mention, Kwame, that in the template that comes from the climate mobilization, there are sections devoted to responding in a just and not just an equitable way as part of the response that we have to have. We can't build on the system that isn't working and continue building on a bad foundation. And I will say, from my perspective, and this is just me speaking personally, I really would like to see more community engagement from people who are different from each other, showing up at council meetings and showing up at groups like ours, because sometimes those important cultural shifts that need to happen will only happen if people show up that bring up those points. And I can bring up the point, and I have brought up the point, but it may not always be listened to because we need more people to bring it up for people to listen. And I guess, like, just specifically, like, I know in the White Lake area that we have had like polluted areas and things like that, and it's not responded to always in a way that is equitable for everyone. And it's especially in Muskegon, those things in a response will be even more important to make sure that it is a diverse group that's involved in the discussion about how we respond as a society to the crisis. It needs to be brought in more. It's just harder. In White Lake, I was looking at the demographics, and I just don't know how to encourage group members that feel welcome to come to our meetings.
I think one of the things that I do for WEMIAC in my position on Muskegon along the Lakeshore is I hold a virtual book chat, and we alternate between a hard-hitting climate change book. We're doing the new climate war starting in October. But the last one we did, and I think a few folks were on it in here, it's called Braiding Sweetgrass. And honestly, it is probably one of the most stunning books that I've read, because it's a woman who has indigenous roots in New York State, and she's a scientist and a professor, and she basically explains the concepts that indigenous people had in interacting in balance with nature. But it's so definitely out of our cultural mindset, because it's not taking more than you need. It's, concepts of reciprocity. It's, I would recommend it as a book to read, but it it's really probably the answer to our challenge, which is we have to learn to live in balance with nature. And all of those lessons were known quite well by indigenous peoples, but they were not taken up by folks who came and ended up living in the US and other areas. So that to me is the answer, is that we have to learn how to live in balance with nature. And that's a tremendously huge cultural shift. Let me see. Oh, the author that Kwame mentioned is Charles Eisenstein, Eisenstein. The More Beautiful World. What is it, Kwame? I'll send it to you, Lori. And then I think
he has one called Climate as well.
Oh, yeah, it's one. Yeah, Climate and
The Ascent of Humanity. Those are the two that I'm reading on his website too. You can read them for free. He doesn't even charge for them necessarily.
Okay, thank you. I know I missed a question here from Rebecca. To Jeff, is there a push to require developers to build more sustainably included in the emergency declaration?
Yeah, so I noted in the chat there, it doesn't talk about it directly. We do it indirectly by mentioning that these climate initiatives, these goals have to be met in the master plan, land use and development needs. So we're coming at it that way because, again, we wanted to keep it a little bit short in the final resolution.
Have you had luck with developers buying into the importance of this?
Well, fortunately, there has been a change and update in the recent building code that they have to meet much higher standards.
Okay.
So I know I was even looking at building codes for insulation within attic areas. So existing building codes, just to give you an example, on the data nerd, For existing buildings, it's an R38 for attic, but all new construction is R60 for our area. So they're
Okay.
great though.
So there's some things that you can do.
Yep.
Okay, there is a great deal of development happening in Muskegon right now, and I am pretty concerned at how rapidly it's happening and how little focus there seems to be on doing, anything to be sustainable. I know the 100 infill houses, I was listening on the last commission meeting and screaming when they were talking about putting in-ground sprinkling and like super turf and like that in each of these houses. And it's like, can we do something different? And we don't seem to have the will for that yet in Muskegon. So I'm looking forward to seeing how we can build that will, because there does not seem to be any interest in doing it without, more of a stick.
I think a great connection for you would be Renee. Green Building Council is making those connections really strong. So that would help as well.
I'm hoping that at some point I can actually persuade Jeff to lead a group to start looking at the all the climate and energy issues. He's already doing it informally. So, if folks are interested in continuing to meet, you know what I mean, whether or not you end up in a seat, we're looking for ways to continue the conversation and continue the progress. Okay. So other questions, and then we've got Bruce there.
Me too, when
Yeah,
we have time.
Oh, and then Mary.
Thank you, Tanya. I want to give the example of a resistant member of our council and how Jeff handled that. We have a separate fund for a campground, and that fund had give or take $250,000 in it. So it was pretty flush. And we were looking at a battery driven mower, but that mower would cost 3 times what a riding gas mower. These are both riding models of mower, and that would cost triple what a gas mower would. But what Jeff had found out from his research is that the battery operated mower would last 6 times as long as a gas mower. But once you did that math, paying triple the price in order to last 6 times as long as that thing that it was costing 3 times as much as, it meant you were spending half the money over the lifespan of that one piece of equipment, half the money you would have spent on 6 gas mowers, and all of them would have been noisier and thrown more greenhouse gas in, and you would have had a wasted mower at the end to have to dispose of. The battery mower had fewer moving parts, lower maintenance, etc. And because the council member pushed Jeff, she got him in touch with Tennessee, a much larger city than ours, and their whole economies of scale are much different than Montague and much beyond Muskegon for that matter. But that led us to finding a demo mower for even less than the retail price of the battery operated machine. So we ended up by cooperating with a resistor and getting information from that resistor within our council, we ended up with a better deal than we had proposed in the first place. We spent less money for a mower that'll last just as long. So my point is, you're going to get resistance from inside your board, and you have to do extra homework. It takes a longer time, and you do extra homework, but by digging deeper, sometimes you end up winning. That resistor ended up voting to agree to the purchase because there it was on paper and pretty hard to argue with for less money to boot.
Well, and I think it's important to always look for the opportunities. Always looking, when you think about West Michigan, you think about auto manufacturing. And so, why is Muskegon County not just jumping onto that, you know, the new electric vehicles, the hybrids, and, you know, all of the potential, you know, moving away from a fossil fuel economy. So I want to make sure that folks who have not had a chance for a question or a comment.
Looks like
if you want
Rachel
to,
has her hand up.
who did?
Looks like Rachel has her hand up.
Okay, and then you know what? While we're kind of finishing up, I don't want to keep you too long. If you want to just put a word in the chat box that comes to mind when you think about the opportunities moving forward, you know, something that you feel is inspiring or compelling, you know, just a one word or a, you know, a statement that you put in the chat that you feel kind of sums up your take on this session. And Rachel, what's your question?
Oh, I was just going to ask, Bruce kind of touched on this earlier with his comment. We all can't be experts on the field, but I'm just curious about the conversations around this conversation itself being a conversation of privilege and how to bring up your residents that are not in a place, right, to be thinking short term about an electric vehicle in the future, but make sure they are coming along the way to understand the issues. And like you're saying, Bruce, how in the long term, it really does benefit all of us. And again, as scientists, you know, we're not all social scientists, so it's an interesting issue that needs to be brought up, but I'm just wondering what resources you guys know might be available to help us better meet our residents where they're at, and kind of move them along, but not leave them behind as well.
It's an excellent question, because it is you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the individual choices are, you know, choices of privilege. And one of the things that I always say to people is, yeah, we need to be making as best choices as we can. On the other hand, we have to elect people into office at local, state, and federal levels that can make the choices available and affordable to everybody. You know, I'm not going to be telling someone who's in survival mode, you know, that they have to investigate and pay for the latest heat pump, you know what I mean? Or they have to buy an electric vehicle. You know, so we have to elect people at all levels who can make the policy decisions, the hard decisions, you know, to make the choices easy and affordable for everybody across the board. You know, so that's a good question, Rachel, that I don't have a really good answer for. Who else wants to touch on that? Mary?
Yeah, I was just going to tell one of the things our group is trying to do is to go to every jurisdiction and use the public comment time to educate the elected officials to help. And I think someone talked, I think it was you, Rebecca, talking about when are we going to start doing things in a different way? And that might be one way to help to do that. But also, Rachel, maybe we could also do that like in Muskegon, they have all these neighborhood clubs. Maybe that same thing could be used. We're just talking 2 or 3 minutes so people don't fall asleep and they can absorb it. Just do that same thing in the neighborhood clubs, maybe as you go around talking to them. Just an idea.
Well, and it is hard to get to people these days. I mean, it's you know, especially the pandemic layered on top of that. You know,
and then Renee has a question.
Yeah, Renee.
Not a question, but a comment to what Rachel brought up. I think a good example that I see, because I get around West Michigan a lot, is the work that Consumers Energy does in other communities, but they may not be doing it here. So I think partnering with someone like Consumers, because we know that if, you know, those individuals that are low income, that can, you know, their utility bills make up 30 to 40% of their income, you know, what can we do to help them be more energy efficient and cut that, you know, utility bill down? So I think, you know, just by looking at our partners that we could partner with, that are doing it in other communities, DTE, the same thing. You know, let's get them doing those kinds of things in our community.
Well, I know in Holland, in Spring Lake, I work with some groups in Grand Haven and Holland, and some of the Habitat for Humanity homes have gone all electric. And so, and there's been some incentives from consumers and DTE to make that happen. So, yeah, so there's a lot to be done, I'll tell you that. There's no lack of things that we can step up to do. So any other questions? Did I miss one from you, Ken? No. No, let me see.
I mean, I do have questions, but I did have my hand up. And it's kind of piggybacking on a question that Rebecca asked earlier in terms of like encouraging developers or pushing developers to incorporate more sustainability aspects into their construction. Has Montague or any other municipalities that you're aware of use the tax incentives programs to encourage developers to say, you're only going to get, you know, X number of additional years or the max number of years or the maximum benefit if you are incorporating, you know, lead level this or a tier system? Are you aware, did you explore that at all in your municipality? Are you aware of that in other municipalities doing such?
I'm just starting to get into that, Ken. I've been talking with a couple different people out of Ann Arbor who have really dug into a lot of that. You know, I'm kind of focused right now on our operations with the intent of, you know, maybe in the next couple of years, we'll be looking at that a little bit more. But a great resource would be Ann Arbor because they are full into that, not only for what they're doing, but for the community as well.
Yeah, they're a pretty good model. I know we're kind of running up against the time, and I really echo Renee and Mary's thoughts. Really want to thank you for showing up tonight. I know your campaigning is not easy, and everybody wants you to come to their event, and they get upset if you don't. So I'm very glad that you showed up here today, and I do hope the conversation does not end. I think, hang on a second, Bruce. I think, you know, I will send an email out to everybody right away with contact information. So if anybody has questions, they can ask, you know, the appropriate folks. The recording will be available probably next week. That takes just a little bit longer. And then also wanted to be sure to invite you next month on October 21, we're having a candidate town hall forum where you can come and you can say, this is the position that in the platform that I have on climate change. So you can actually come and say, this is what I think I would like to do in my township, my village, my city, and present that. I ideally, you know, it will inspire others, and it will, you know, kind of indicate that Muskegon County is, you know, definitely leading the way. I want to see if Renee, did you have anything else you wanted to add as one of the organizers?
No, just, you know, we have a follow-up session that we'll be doing in October for this. And I know that there's a lot of things going on in all your communities. So it's a time to maybe take an inventory of what you're doing currently and maybe, you know, offer to be part of the panel for October and share with what you've got going on. Because I personally know about things going on in the city of Muskegon, and I think you need to brag about that. So just a chance to shine.
Any of our presenters, any final comments?
It's actually just typing in the chat that, you know, would encourage all municipalities to, you know, put all the ideas out on the table. You know, I've found that in developing this climate map is that it's also put lots of ideas out there. And I've realized that what I thought was going to be a straight path is it's more of the buckshot, you know. This opportunity comes up now, and so we grab that and move forward with that. And there's another opportunity over here, which was not the direction I was heading, but it makes economic sense for right now, and it's a good opportunity. So without having all the ideas, don't think that it's going to be a straight line to achieve your goal. So the more voices, the more people that can weigh in, I think the better off.
And Bruce, you've got like 2 seconds. We've got to go before my dogs start barking again. Sorry.
Don't limit yourself to Michigan. Berea, Kentucky is very similar to Whitehall and Montague. And Berea, Kentucky has been ahead of the game for a while in a very rural area, in a relatively impoverished area. So it can be done. It all depends on what you're thinking about doing and getting people behind it. But don't limit yourself to only thinking about Ann Arbor and Berkeley.
And I'd like to just add one thing. The title of my presentation was Simple, Serious, and Solvable. And so climate science may sound really complex, but it's fairly simple. And all those little charts and graphs really point to what's going on. And then when I was talking about some of the implications, impacts, those are serious. But as everybody has joined in tonight, in saying that there are solutions, so it is solvable.
I want to thank our presenters. Thank you very much. Thank everybody who showed up, and hope you have a great rest of your evening. And certainly reach out to us if you would like to have anyone help. And you know what? Talk about climate change. I was in my local Goodwill store today, and I asked these young people shopping there if they were 18 and could they vote and did they know what was going on in their city. And I talked to them about climate change, and I talk about climate change to people, get it to be a regular topic of conversations, and good luck with your campaigns.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Take care. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, everybody.